Welcome to Binge the Bible Bonus Features, a podcast where we dive into the crazy, unexpected, and interesting details that we didn't have time to talk about on Sunday. When you get into God's Word gets into you. We want to help you get into the Bible, understand the Bible, and apply the Bible. And our hope is that Bonus Features will help you do that. Well, I am your host, Caroline, and I am joined today by Pastor Jeff, Pastor Jason, and Pastor Kevin.
We're back.
Yes. We're back, guys.
The gang
with
back
you guys.
together.
Back in the saddle again.
Back with all the binges.
Oh, it's good to have you guys.
The Bingers, if you will. You know?
I like that.
Bingers.
Well, today we're doing something for the first time in our first few episodes. We're doing 2 books of the Bible in one.
Boom. A little
Double
2-for-1.
feature.
Double feature.
A double feature.
Double
if you will.
feature, bonus feature.
So this episode will be 5.5 hours long.
Yeah. Everybody grab a snack and get ready. Yeah.
Double the books, double the fun.
Yeah. I like that. That's nice. Well, so we're going to go over Numbers and Deuteronomy today.
Riveting
Stuff. Yeah. Well, let's get started. You know, some moments from the weekend, maybe some major moments. Pastor Jason, what do you think?
Well, so one of the things that I do like about this book is like going through the series the way we have, it kind of makes me engage even more just with the context and everything. But as far as Pastor, the way you hit Numbers, I mean, you kind of hit, I mean, the major moments are pretty like spelled out, if you will, like, I mean, numbered. So it's pretty easy to see like where the major stuff is. So I thought maybe we could like we could just hit some of the moments that stood out and kind of talk through, like just giving you an opportunity to talk through in a deeper way. Cause there were a few things, that you were scouting, or I say scouting through because that's what I just saw in my Bible. But some of the things that you hit, and then you're like, hey, read that later on. I feel like that those are areas you like to park out. There's also a story that you didn't get to mention that's from Numbers that I thought would be fun to talk about too.
Okay, yeah, Balaam.
Balaam.
Yes, great story.
And I've heard, and you've actually referenced him in different things too. But one thing, I mentioned this to Caroline and Pastor Kevin, I mentioned it to you, just kind of introducing this before we get started, because with the major moments, we usually like jump into deeper themes. Some of the deeper themes, it just kind of continues from the rest of the Pentateuch: human rebellion, divine punishment, divine provision, more laws, Moses' leadership, and then God's covenant with Abraham is still in the spotlight. But one of the things, Pastor Kevin, you mentioned on a couple of episodes ago of the podcast, you told a story about when Moses was a baby, that it's believed that he was reaching for Pharaoh's crown, and you talked about that whole scenario. And there was some terminology that I remembered, but I was afraid I'd get it wrong, so I didn't want to introduce it. But with us coming to the end of Deuteronomy and seeing like the wrap up of the law of Moses, one of the questions that we're already getting, I've been emailed several times. In fact, Chrissy from Porter's Neck sent me an email, and she had some questions. We talked about it at church Sunday. But one of the things is, where did all the additional laws come from? And so I thought that'd be something we could just kind of introduce and maybe talk about for a second. So just some background on that. That story that Pastor Kevin mentioned that you talked about is in something called the Talmud, and it's something that came about after the book of the law, because what it basically was like as like definitive as the law of Moses was, there was still a lot of like openness of like, well, when do we do this? And, you know, they needed more specific interpretation. So what they did was there was a tradition of oral law. And again, we're talking thousands of years. The popular belief is that this was collected, well into before right into the early years of our Lord, like you're talking AD. A lot of this stuff was compiled before and after Jesus' birth. A lot of like hundreds of years of discussion. It was compiled somewhere between anywhere from between the 2nd and 4th century, AD or whatever, and like kind of put in. But then the reason it took so long is because, you know, rabbis spent so many hundreds of years actually discussing and debating and laboring a lot of the oral traditions. So those oral traditions are what we see that happened in the BC time period. And so all those oral traditions were, it was almost like commentary built around the law of Moses. And some of it was oral. Actually, up until then, most of it was oral. It was solidified and written, and there were 2 parts. And I'll pull up my notes just so I don't get the words wrong. But there were 2 parts in the Talmud. One, and they were the oral law of Judaism was Mishnah, and the particular teachings in the Mishnah were called midrash. That story that you gave would have been a particular midrash. And so then you
midrash.
Did that clear up? Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Did you guys look at something?
But in the Talmud,
the Leviticus talk. Find out if I need to. Go ahead.
There's prescription. It's prescriptive. It's prescriptive.
Yeah.
The word is
Anyway.
prescriptive for the midrash.
Sorry, I
Some of these words you just can't help but go.
Actually, I prefer prescriptive other than descriptive when it comes to the midrash.
that's what we get when we do a lot of sit-ups.
you get a mid-rash. There's an ointment.
I feel like that's a good spot to tell the story of where I was on that trip with you last summer. And
where were we last summer?
Oh, sorry. Well, we're at Church's Creek.
Oh, yes.
And you invited me to go work out, do a CrossFit workout.
Absolutely, we did.
And I was like, I'm not going to tell my pastor. No, I'm not going to go
a
work
ton of
out with
sit-ups
you.
and you got some mid-rash.
Oh, yeah.
Well, you don't know about it until you get in the shower later.
I was good, and I took a shower, and I was like, oh, wow.
It's like a flamethrower. Yeah, sorry. How in the world did we go
Oh,
from numbers
man.
to
Listen,
mid-rash
it's
to...
TMI.
I don't even know
There
where
are
to
3 people
read the
listening who are
record.
going to know exactly what we're talking about.
So good
welcome.
stuff. But long story
Anyway.
short, just a way for them to understand the law of Moses more was through the Talmud. And there were 2 parts. There was the captured oral tradition, which was the Mishnah. And then there was the more educational side of it, which was called the Gemara or the Gemara. And so that's where all those come from. So if you're wondering where these extra laws and stuff came from, like, thousands of years later, which is one of the reasons Jesus was fulfilling the law, because it kind of got a little out of hand. Yeah. Pastor, I've heard you talk about that before, is how they started having a law for everything. Some of it really started favoring
literally
the
how
Pharisees.
many paces you can take, like in
Exactly.
a day on the Sabbath,
Yeah.
and
And that's where we see like Pharisaical rule instead of just rabbinical law.
The other thing that I would like to throw in just before we get away from the Pentateuch or the Torah is that young boys, kids would memorize. Like we've been laboring through these books. They would memorize it. Mm-hmm. Is that not ridiculous? I mean, just literally putting Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy to memory.
There was a certain age where they had it memorized by, and I can't remember what the age was, but I do know there's a year mark.
Crazy
where
stuff.
By that time, it was completely memorized.
That's impressive. I definitely don't think I could do one, much less
I don't
5.
remember my phone number at this point, so
Ew, who would remember their phone number?
No, we don't have to anymore.
Yeah, why would you need to?
Well, Numbers is definitely, I think, I made the comment when we got to Leviticus, this is where Bible readings plans go to die. And Numbers, if you survive Leviticus, you're usually like limping into Numbers. And if you don't know the context of it, it is easy to just start turning pages and be like, oh, for crying out loud, how many people in this tribe and this tribe and this tribe? And hopefully people are beginning to put the story together a little bit better, that they're understanding it's the formation of a nation. He is literally giving them, even in the beginning, we talked about how Israel's numbered and they're arranged. It's like he's helping them understand, one, I need you to know how powerful you are. Not for your own sense of strength, but when you have a slavery mentality, and now he wants them to know you're a chosen people, you're powerful. So he gives them this census to find out how many able-bodied men are there, because the land they're stepping into is occupied. There's going to be some battles ahead. But then just the simple fact, if you think about how that very first census, we're told that there was 603,550 able-bodied men 20 years and over. Add in women, children, Levites, you have 2.5 million people. Can you imagine every time they stopped, like every time the cloud stopped and they had to set up the tabernacle, people they had to know, where's my clan, where's my tribe? And the Lord's like, all right, y'all are never going to find your people again. So he gave them a seating chart. Like he literally laid out a map for them. And I just thought how brilliant that God did that. He brought order, because even back in Genesis, he brings order out of chaos. And here he is. He's bringing order out of what otherwise would have been chaotic. It's what God does. So just to me was a cool little insight as we got started. And then I think I made mention in the sermon that 150 times we see the phrase, the Lord spoke to Moses, repeated throughout the book of Numbers, which, what great instructions. I mean, the Lord spoke to Moses. The Lord spoke to Moses. The Lord spoke to Moses. I just think it's worth reiterating that.
Yeah.
That's good.
I think that something, even just from my perspective, that this series has been really great for is helping me, I think, bring reason to a lot of things that might have seemed, sorry, Lord, boring in the past. Like things that I just kind of have read, from being honest. I'm a New Testament gal, I guess. But I read through all these things, and I think bringing some why behind a lot of it has been really helpful because, I didn't grow up learning a lot of the stories. And so just knowing, the reason for counting the people, the reason for the laws, it's been really cool to help. This series has been really neat, and I appreciate that we're doing something like this because it's kind of tying a lot of things together and making it more, just more emphasis on the fact that the Lord really does care about the details, not just arbitrarily, but because he cares about us.
Yeah. Well, and it zooms out and lets us read the scripture the way it was really meant to be read, which is as a story, not as like a verse, like where you just go find a verse and pull it and apply it to something. But it's a story. It's something that made sense in the history of a nation. And so when you view it that way, it does make reading it just a lot more, it comes to life a lot better.
Well, and we've said before, God's story is our history.
Right.
His story is our history. Now, I will say all scripture is equally inspired. Not all scripture is equally inspiring. And we definitely can get tripped up at times when we're making our way through. But I do think being able to see how this puzzle piece fits in a bigger picture has made it's really connected a lot of dots for me as well. Yeah. So hopefully it's doing that I'd love to hear from our folks that have been listening to sermons, doing reading plans, and joining in on this bonus features just to find out how the pieces are falling together. Because I really feel like that is, the dots are connecting for me. Mm-hmm. So hopefully...
What's interesting, Pastor Jeff, so yesterday I was at the Pine Valley campus, and there was a girl, her name's Amanda. She serves on our coffee team here at this campus. And she stopped me. She came up to me and just said, hey, the podcast, the Binge Bible podcast, just wanted to let you guys know I love it. I'm reading the Bible completely different. Like she specifically said that it's made, kind of what you said, Caroline, it's made the Bible come to life in just a different way. And then she said, and you guys are crazy. So you make me laugh at the same time.
She was talking about you guys.
So, right.
I learned what midrash means this time.
right.
For the record, it's not what we were saying.
It's not that.
Yeah.
But Amanda, if you're listening, thanks for listening.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, Pastor Jason, you were talking about some major moments of some things.
Yeah. Well, and somebody said something about the relationship that Moses had, look how God's setting up the camp and everything, but just how he even spoke to Moses. This is skipping ahead a little bit, but I was thinking of the verse in chapter 12 verse 8, where it says, if there were prophets among you, I, the Lord, would reveal myself in visions. I would speak to them in dreams, but not with my servant Moses. Of all my house, he is the one I trust. I speak to him face to face, clearly, and not in riddles. He sees the Lord as he is. And this is actually when he was coming down on Miriam and Aaron for criticizing him, but to know that Moses had that kind of relationship with God and they had that kind of leader in their midst was pretty amazing.
Yeah, and I think God was like, how dare you speak out about the leader that I've called over you. That was a gutsy move.
Yeah. Well, the very next sentence after what you just read is, why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? And the anger of the Lord burned against them, and he left them.
Yeah, and this is another instance where, so Miriam is most likely leading the charge here. Aaron's a little bit of a pacifist, if we want to just call it for what it is.
Yeah.
He's an Enneagram 9 for sure.
Easy on the Enneagram 9s, okay?
I'm not. That's not a bad word or anything. I'm just saying.
If you say Miriam's a 3,
I don't know who made this.
Miriam just got a little. but look, do you remember what happened to Miriam? What happened to her? She gets some leprosy.
Yeah, she got a touch
Lord
of
is
the
like,
leprosy.
you get leprosy, and of course, and what's crazy is they still cry out that like Moses, heal her, and he wants her healed. So Moses is like, God, heal her. And he does. He's like, just, she's going to be unclean for 7 days. That had to be a long 7 days. Mm-hmm. But the fact that, Moses is what an amazing leader. Because not everybody has always appreciated my leadership over the years. And, I've never wished leprosy on anybody. But I also had it happen. I've been like, that's what you get. And Moses wasn't like that. He was like, no, God, don't do this. And so I look, how many times did Moses step in on behalf of the people he was leading and the people he represented? He really did believe like he is responsible. And as a leader, you are.
And you see it, he did it for one, like he did for the entire nation.
Yes.
In that instance. It was awesome.
Well, and it goes back to when he was living in Egypt and he came to the defense of an Israelite who was being beaten. Like he had a heart for, to me, I think even though people came against him, one of the things that I can't prove this is why God opened up to him or anything like that, but he had a heart for the people. Like it was just, his heart broke for them. To me as a leader, one of the tests of a leader and the hallmark of a great one is not just high skill, because Moses confessed, I don't have a lot of that, but it's a big heart for people. And God can use that. Like you can learn skill, but you can't learn compassion. And to me, that's something that just Moses had. It's a good through line for his
While
story.
we're in chapter 12, I know we just kind of jumped to chapter 12 to talk about that. This is where this amazing verse is at, 12 verse 3, where it says, now Moses was a very humble man, more humble than anyone else on the face of the earth. And I always found that humorous because Moses is the author.
Yeah.
And it's like in the Gospel of John when John's like, and the one that Jesus loved, that he's talking about himself, and he was super fast. Yeah. He's faster than Peter. Now, there is some speculation that perhaps Joshua came back and wrote this after the fact. But I was just curious because I just thought it's a little weird to brag about your humility. It's like if you have to tell people how humble you are you really that humble? And as I was reading, I just thought it'd be worth mentioning that they're saying the word may not be rightly understood. Anav is the word, and it's translated, we can translate it meek. It means to act upon, to humble, to depress, to afflict. It's translated a lot of times in the Old Testament. And in this sense, it should be understood. Now, this man, Moses, was depressed or afflicted more than any other man of the land. Makes total sense when you look at everything this guy is doing. Never signed up for the job, tried to get out of it. At every turn, the people are like wanting to kill him, leave him, talk bad about him. So my man had to have some serious depression, anxiety, affliction. So maybe it's not saying like, oh, look how humble I am. Instead, it's like, oh man, I am afflicted more than just about anybody else.
It's interesting too. I mean, that when you think about, again, as a leader, just the layers of his frustration, we see it later on when he struck the rock and just things like that, where he was frustrated, but it makes you wonder, was he frustrated at the people or for the people? Because anytime we've seen someone that maybe we lead or have influence over or whatever, they don't live up to their potential. It is like heartbreaking. It does make you feel like a little bit more desolate,
Yeah, it's not mutually exclusive. I mean, you can definitely be frustrated at and for someone. I mean, especially when you see people, Pastor, on Sunday, you were saying complaining is contagious. And so you're seeing people continually be complaining about different things, the same things, all those words that you're like, ugh, and we, of course, are like, gosh, get over it. But they're 40 years in the desert here. It's like,
right. And that's, I think that
you chill?
We do need to give, I'm not giving them too much credit, but let's be real. We have the luxury of turning pages.
We know the end of the story.
We can read 40 minutes of or 40 years of their life in 40 minutes. And I mean, every day, I'm not saying it's justified because again, they watched water get parted. They watched this, delivery out of Egypt, but to just see this, repeated, like the rock thing. I mean, he was like, you rebels. I mean, you could tell he's
heated.
He's done with them. He's like, I'm so over you guys. I'm so over you. I feel like every time that murmurers got killed, he was like, that's what you get.
Bye-bye.
That's what you get. Who's next? Who wants a piece of me?
Well, but I'm like, driving down the road in my air-conditioned car yesterday, sipping my Starbucks, listening to the Bible, because your Bible app will read it to you. And, listening to it, them grumbling about not having food. I'm like, ugh, get over it. I'm like sipping my chai tea latte. But it's like, geez, can you just?
These people,
will they ever learn?
As if.
Me to me. Do I say that?
No,
you say that like that's my tagline.
As if.
I'm not even clueless.
These people.
That is a great movie, though.
Okay, so.
So before this podcast, we
teed
were
that up.
talking about our favorite movies, 80s movies. So that will be for a future episode. But trust me, it's pretty good.
It's pretty good.
Pretty good.
Clueless will make the list for sure. But yeah. So actually, Pastor Kevin, you did just mention in passing Moses striking the rock and where that led to. I think that might be a good place to kind of expound upon a little bit.
Yeah. Well, because that whole attitude, because it is. I mean, we've already seen like the rise of the pattern. God delivers, people are happy, then they're unhappy, then they rebel, and then God punishes, and then people come back, and then the pattern starts. And I love like cross-referencing, because so many questions we have, a lot of the same ones that keep coming back are like, well, it doesn't really pertain to now. And Pastor, I love what you said like a few weeks ago, because you were saying like why all these things are so relevant for now, and it's to create that intimacy with God and that walk of discipleship. Well, in Hebrews in chapter 3, I just was looking through this earlier, but you see like kind of like a little bit of a rebuke, and why like these times are so important, and why this history, just to bring it back to your words, Pastor, like why it's still so important and relevant. In chapter 3, it even says like, this is why the Holy Spirit says, today when you hear his voice, don't harden your hearts, as Israel did when they rebelled, when they were tested by me in the wilderness. The wilderness, as we know, was another name for the book of Numbers. Thanks for that, Pastor. Their ancestors tested and tried my patience, even though they saw my miracles for 40 years. So in that wilderness, in that like wandering, they were still face to face with God and his miracles. And it said, so I was angry with them, and I said, their hearts always turn from me. They refuse to do what I tell them. So in my anger, I took an oath, they will never enter my place of rest. And then, so the writer of Hebrews goes on to say, be careful then, dear brothers and sisters, make sure that your own hearts are not evil and unbelieving, turning you away from the living God. You must warn each other every day while it is still today, so that none of you will be deceived by sin and harden against God. And it just shows that this is the reminder that a lot of the behavior that they were being pointed towards is something that's still relevant for today. That's still that same attitude. And I think that was one of the things that ultimately did frustrate Moses as a leader, because he got that face-to-face time with God. He was already enjoying God's presence. I gotta believe that he even got to see a little bit more of the promise, because he got to see the reality of God, and the people didn't. And Moses could see where God wanted to take them and how he wanted to get there, but they weren't willing to walk it out. And he had to watch a whole generation of people that he probably thought he was going to lead into the promised land initially not get to do that because of their rebelliousness. And that's why, like, there are things like, even starting in chapter 5, we see like God wanting them to maintain purity in the camp of Israel, protecting marital faithfulness and all this stuff. But it goes back to like what God wanted, and that Moses wanted this for the people. Yeah.
Which, when just for a second, this may fit in our, maybe I'm jumping ahead, and this is a cringy moment, but when chapter 5, when it talks about the test for an unfaithful wife, did anybody find this to be interesting?
I found it to be cringy. That's
so like everything is on this woman. Like if you think your wife has been unfaithful, you bring her before the priest, which is interesting, because I was reading that what you're doing is you're putting her in the hands of the Lord is essentially what you're doing. But the way that the test was, she had this bitter water, which was a combination of dust from the floor of the tabernacle, and then there was writing in ink, and then that was washed off into the water. So she's drinking this water that's dust from the floor and then ink, but she's basically saying, if I'm guilty, let my abdomen swell. If I am, pregnant, I'll miscarry. And she's like, let it be so. So she's saying, if I'm guilty, so she's kind of calling down a curse upon herself. If she's been unfaithful, then she drinks this water. And I guess they just kind of wait. And they're just like, how you feeling? She's like, I feel okay. And it just seems kind of crazy. I don't know. My mind went to, I think it's Monty Python and the Holy Grail, when they're like, is she a witch? Do you guys remember the scene? Do you remember?
Yes.
Barely. Yeah. I do remember it. Yeah.
Oh, I do.
Anyway, sideways. But I just thought it was, I don't know. In my mind, I was like, yeah, you're drinking dirt and ink and not supposed to have any issues. But I guess to get back to the Bible, to leave Monty Python, the thought was that the Lord will protect her, and that I guess this wasn't enough to make you sick if you have not been unfaithful. But if you've been unfaithful, what you've said, the Lord would bring to pass, and that's how you would then know. Then it was thought, because you're like, okay, well, what about the dude? And the thought was that if her stomach, if she had issues, then that man that she was with would as well. And that was kind of implied. Because you're always like, what was the guy's just gone on living his life. But anyway, I just thought, what a interesting way. It was a public spectacle. It was a way of reinforcing marital faithfulness. It's kind of like, hey, this is a public thing. So if you were even considering, you might want to shut that down. Yeah. So I thought it was okay. Interesting way of
Very
putting
interesting.
that to the test.
Yeah. That's true.
Law of jealousy.
Oh man, it gives so much more dimension. Like when we talk about it in these terms, and you get to kind of hear the real talk, doesn't it kind of put it in like a little bit more of a dimension? It goes from like 2-dimensional reading to like 3-dimensional thinking, and I like that. That's actually one of the reasons, Pastor, I thought it would be fun to dig into chapter 6 a little bit and the Nazarite laws.
The Nazarites,
because to me this whole thing opened up. Because a lot of people see this and reading it out of context, you're like, man, they took it a step further. But what people didn't understand is like there were people that existed at this time they wanted to be more dedicated to the Lord. They wanted to be set apart even more. They were the ones that wanted to go deeper. And this wasn't an anomaly. This wasn't mentioned as a new thing. This is something that we believe had been around for a while,
Right.
and even carried on into the New Testament. And it's not something the Bible goes into a lot of detail about. It was just something that different characters did. And there's a few that we,
every now and then,
and there's a few that we do believe, and you guys feel free to jump in and expound, but just some of the examples that I had seen, one was Joseph. People think that Joseph was one of these. He was a Nazarite.
I
Okay.
had not heard that.
Yeah. And
I know obviously Samson, John the Baptist, Paul.
Yep.
What I didn't realize the more I started looking into it, so the English word Nazarite transliterates the Hebrew word Nazir, which means set apart. So obviously this has been God setting apart his people, but these are people that are like, you know what? I'm not a priest. I'm not of the, I'm not a Levite, but if I wanted to make a priest-like vow and live in a priest-like consecration to God for a period of time, I could enter into a Nazarite vow. And so there were certain things that, like, for instance, the things prohibited for the Nazarite took some of the things forbidden for priests and made them even stronger. So priests were not allowed to drink while serving as priests, but Nazarites were never allowed to drink. Priests could mourn the death of their closest relatives according to custom. Nazarites could not. And I read that a vow of a Nazarite was never taken for less than a year. So less than this, because you had to allow your hair to grow, and then there was something about shaving your hair and it becoming like burning it, which had to smell like crazy. So you had to give it enough time. So you can't be like, I think I'm going to do a Nazarite vow for the week. It's like, no, you got to do it for at least a year.
It's not like a Daniel fast kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Like
Right.
Daniel fasting for
Fast social media. Yeah. No, it's a little more intense.
Not a real fast.
Right. And I also think it's interesting that the vow had an end date.
Yeah.
Like it really didn't go forever. Like it was something that, and I really don't know this historical or biblical significance of that, other than the fact that it is a season of intensity. And I think it just speaks to, like, even for us, like during certain seasons where maybe you're reading like more of the Bible for a season, or you're fasting for a season, that like we're human. So we have to like have starts and stops.
Yep.
God orchestrates things in seasons, and that season of intensity and consecration, it came and it went.
Yeah.
And that it didn't mean that they walked away from God. It just meant that season of intensity wasn't.
Yeah, and where I see some of this come into play, and that even to me is even relevant now, because my mind I always try to like connect things, and so like some of this stuff I'm still thinking through and figuring out. And Pastor Kevin, I don't want to take any of your thunder, because I know you're going to be bringing judges to us. But I know like Samson's parents took a vow of the Nazarite, but when they were believing God for a baby. And so that was like a season when they were believing God for something. And so to me, it's almost like a way of intentionally consecrating your fasting time. Like for us, like how do we grow deeper in the Lord, and like honestly, like not be afraid to believe God to do something.
Yeah.
And I see that, to me, that's where kind of the authority and the power come in, and where we see that even in later in chapter 6, we see that the Lord gave Moses. He said, "Tell Aaron and his sons to bless the people of Israel." And we see that like the Lord said that every time you do this, I will bless them, and so I see like these blessings that God says he will do, like he's faithful to do. But I do believe that whenever we can like rest in and believe God for something that he can do, like he can do it.
Yeah, and their commitment was so intense that if somebody died in your presence, if you were like Pastor Kevin, if you were under a Nazarite vow, you've been growing your hair and this commitment, and I keel over dead in your presence. You now have to go shave your head and like start over. You're like, come on, man.
That's
Super.
Bummer.
Yeah.
I've been at this
It's
for a while.
interesting, yeah.
We should all do a 1-year Nazarite vow.
Just not cut our hair.
Just have like man
I
buns.
thought that's what
and-
you were, Pastor Kevin. I thought that's what you were doing with like the swoopy hair.
I was. There
vibe
was a
going on.
season where I was going full Nazarite.
Now we know.
And then
Now we know.
summer came around.
Yeah,
so.
it's too hot.
So quick stop here, chapter 7. Something I just thought was interesting. So they're given instructions on offerings at the dedication of the tabernacle. So we talked tabernacle in Exodus. God gave those instructions. But what we begin to see is they go through all of these different leaders who are bringing these offerings. And it's like you keep reading the same thing over and over and over. It gets a little redundant. But what I believe is going on here is that God is impressing into them generous giving. And so God must show promised land people how to be givers. One of the best measures of one who is moved from a slave mindset to a promised land mindset is generosity. The slave by nature is a taker because he's often unsure of his provision, but promised land people are generous because they trust in a God who promised to meet all of their needs. So they don't have a whole lot other than what they left Egypt with, which again, they did get a lot of spoils from the people, but they've been on the go for a little bit. But when they come to make these offerings, we see this act of generosity on behalf of each of the tribes. And I felt like it's a way of saying, we're trusting you, God. Yeah. And I think the same is true today. I think a mark of maturity is generosity. It's being able to say, God, I trust you with what I've received. I trust you with what I have because I know you're my provider. And anyway, I just thought it was a neat way of them making a statement of trust to the Lord, getting rid of that slavery mentality, stepping into a promised land mentality.
Yeah. What is that great reminder, Pastor, of what you've said, even through this series, that he not only wanted to take them out of Egypt, but also take the Egypt out of them.
Yes. Well, and at the, if you get to the very end of chapter 7, they've all given generously. Moses enters the tent of meeting to speak with the Lord, and it says he heard the voice speaking to him from between the two cherubim. And I just thought, what a great way of, so often it's generosity that just removes things from our life and allows us to hear a little clearer. And it obviously happened in their midst as Moses stepped in after the people modeled this generosity. So,
and if, you got to think, just because we know the end of this story, if they'd have stayed in that mode of gratitude, would the complaining and rebelliousness had kind of persisted?
It would have looked a little different. It'd be a shorter book, that's for sure.
Well, I've heard too that gratitude and anxiety can't exist in the same, like chemically in your brain, it can't exist in the same space. So, I mean, just being filled with gratitude alone will eliminate things like anxiety about finances or provision or anything like that. I mean,
interesting. I've never heard that.
Yeah, like if you're filled with gratitude and you're focused on generosity because your gratitude, you don't have brain space for anything else.
It's interesting. Anxiety is usually about trying to hold on to something,
right?
Hold on to control, and gratitude usually comes from generosity, which is about letting something go. So that's really
it's the closed hand, open hand type of mentality. That's good. I like that.
That's cool. I like that. Well, and Pastor, and you were telling us something, and I was saying I've heard you kind of mention this story a while, but in chapter 8 where we see preparing the lamps.
Talking about the lamps. This is there's no time to get deep into this. Exodus, God gives Moses instructions for the tabernacle, and one of the things is this lampstand. He's told how to make this lampstand, where it's supposed to go, and how you're supposed to position the light of this lampstand. So you figure they're lighting these, they look like candles, they're oil lamps, and it's made to illuminate what is in front of it, which in front of it would be called the table of showbread, also known as the provision of God. So fast forward New Testament, what is the provision of God? Jesus is the provision of God. So in essence, this bread is symbolic of Jesus, who is the bread of life, all right? And so if you jump all the way to Revelation, spoiler alert, okay, we're going to get there in a really long time, that we're told that these churches that use their light, they're like lampstands, and when they use their light to illuminate anything other than the provision of God, God says, I'll put you out. And it's just a reminder to me, this is just something I hold as a pastor of Lifepoint, that we've been given the instructions and the call of God to illuminate the provision of God. We are a lampstand to our community. And if we start taking the light that God has given us and we use it to illuminate anything else, I mean, it can be politics, it can be that whatever the latest thing is, I think God says that's not why I gave you that light.
Yeah.
The lamp is made to illuminate the provision of God. And in chapter 8, we just see him say, when you set up the lamps, see that all 7 light up the area in front of the lampstand. What is that area? Table of showbread, provision of God. That is our job,
really
to
good.
illuminate
That's
the provision
cool.
of God.
Yeah, that is super.
That's excellent.
I think I preached a message on that back in like 2007. So maybe I'll blow some dust off
I
of
don't know
that,
that
bring
any
it
of
back
us
I think
someday.
that's really good. Well, because you just think about, like, of all of the things that we could shine a spotlight on, that we could try to tackle. You mentioned politics. You could go down a million roads. Like, what agenda has popped up this week in our country and in our world?
Right.
And to just continue to point to the provision and presence of God, like that really is, to your point, what we're called to do. And I think, Pastor, on behalf of us and everybody listening, like, I think it's that heart is why we love following you and why we love being a part of this church, because we just continue to do that.
Well, I appreciate that. I know over the last couple of years, that's been one thing that's reminded me is like we're here so that people would meet Jesus. We're here so that people would meet Jesus. And so often, you feel like, I have personal opinions, but at the end of the day, I want people to see Jesus. And if I go hard right, hard left, I know that I'm going to drive away people that need to hear about Jesus. At the end of the day, God called my family to come to Wilmington to start a church so that people who don't know Jesus would meet Jesus.
Yeah.
And it's not always the easy thing, because everybody wants you to speak up about their issue, their thing, but it's like, it's back to Jesus.
Right.
It's all about Jesus, always Jesus, only Jesus.
Yeah.
He is the provision. So anyway.
And the issues can't get equal time. Because I love what Pastor Kevin, you said this last week or a couple episodes ago of the podcast, where you said if we get so focused on the right thing or the Jesus thing, like we'll become even more aware of the counterfeits. So I feel like the more we get to step out and see life in Jesus, we get familiar with what he's all about, and that's what our life will start to reflect.
Yeah. Bob Goff says, don't worry about being right, worry about being Jesus. And I
That's
think
good.
That's good.
Great.
That's good.
That's great.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was a little longer than I planned on talking about lamps and lampstands, but
Excellent.
just a little nugget there.
Yeah.
Well, and just to keep skipping around, one of my favorite stories, like from being as a kid, is the scouting report of the 12 when they go to explore the cave. And can I tell you guys, from like a guy that loves like camping, survival, hiking, like I would get lost for 40 days out in the wilderness for fun. These guys did it as like a little recce event, like, a little recon. And I love hearing that and like thinking through like everything they had to do, like the mission that was at hand. So I thought we could just dig in there a little deeper, especially because Caleb and Joshua, legends, literally legends.
One thing I think is kind of interesting is, of all of these people, like, think of the names for just a minute. Shammah. Anybody know any Shammahs out there? Any Shaphats? Shaphats? No.
Be careful with that one.
Eagles? Any Eagles? You go through and you start looking. Palti? Gaddiel? Like, these names, we don't know any of them. But then Joshua, we know some Joshuas. Caleb, we know some Calebs.
Right.
Just makes me wonder, if those other guys had a little more faith, would we be like, there'd be a bunch of Paltis running around?
Might be named Eagle today.
Yeah.
We don't know.
So anyway,
Those are future
What
baby
was
names
the
that
other
I
one?
picked out.
I
but
know
it's
the
fine.
other name. I don't want to say it because I will.
I'm saying
I will-
Shaphat, but it could be
I'll
Shaphat.
slip.
It could be
Nope, let's not.
Yeah, I'll let you guys handle that one. My country accent, that doesn't come out.
Nobby.
Most of the time.
Nobby. Is there a Nobby present?
I'd hate to be the one to raise my hand. Oh, that's me.
Gul, son of Maki. Gul.
There's a lot of vowels in that name.
So,
Yeah.
but they're told, go check out the land. And I love that the instructions were, the land that I am giving to the Israelites. It's like, just go take a peek at what I have for you.
Well, and there are specific questions there. Like, look for these, like, look for X, Y, and Z. Like, what kind of land do they live in? Is it good? Is it bad? Like, basically, is it good to harvest? What kind of towns do they live in? Are they unwalled, fortified? How's the soil? Is it fertile? Is it poor? And when they come back, they answer a little bit of that, but really what they answer is, here's what's the opposition.
Right.
This is what scares us. Like, there's all of that. There's everything. Basically, they say it does flow with milk and honey. It is everything God promised, but there's all of this.
Yeah. And we get a picture of leadership by committee right here.
Right.
Right here. It never ends well.
Yeah.
They're told, go check out the land, and they come back with why it won't work. That was never the assignment.
Right.
So
That always bugged me the most about the story is they came back and they start talking. I'm like, no. They didn't tell you to do that.
Right.
Because it wasn't going like get the layout for a battle plan.
Right.
It was like almost more of an agricultural or community building report.
Right.
So, and that goes with the language of God giving it to you. And I love that they even brought in, like, some parts of me wonder, like, I'm pretty sure there were big guys there, but parts of me wonder when they said all the descendants of Anak,
Yeah, there's Nephilim there.
The giants. Like, I wonder if they, I'm sure I feel like they were over embellishing. That maybe they were. But I feel like they just wanted to prove their point. We can't do this because they've got those people.
But the grapes were good. They had good grapes.
But the line, we seem like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we look the same to them. Like just that line to me, and we've heard sermons preached on that and talked about that ourselves. But just that one line puts in perspective when you trust you more than you trust Him.
Yeah.
Like it's what always happens. God calls you to something great. When you start putting your confidence in yourself, you look so small compared to that. Versus when you just trust Him.
Yeah,
He's already overcome it.
Yeah.
And so let's just follow Him. He'll take care of the rest.
Yeah.
So to me, I love that story.
Well, and I think it's a great spot to bring in too, because some of the language, because we didn't really tackle this a lot when we discussed Genesis with the Nephilim, but nobody really.
Is that how you say it? The Nephilim?
I have no idea.
I always said.
I mean, I have this.
I've heard Nephilim.
I feel like I'm Pastor Kevin. I'm like, I'm from Columbus County. Right. There's a lot we don't say this.
How did you say it?
I said Nephilim, but you know what? I have a book that was given to me today on how to pronounce things. And it's in my office, so we'll report back later. Exactly how to say it.
I'll ask Siri later.
And even so, the root of that word, though, like Nephal, means to fall. And so the belief was that these were like possibly fallen angels, not the big rock monsters. To me, the language that I can say this from a comfy, cozy seat here, and not being the one in the battle or the layout there. But the language that I would have seen was like, well, they're fallen. And, they're not of our God.
Yeah.
And He's given us this victory. So He's stronger than they are because they're fallen. And I think that was the important language to see what was communicated even in Genesis of
Did you say
these
not
creatures.
big rock monsters?
Yeah, not big rock monsters from the Noah movie.
Yeah. I remember
Yeah.
seeing that thinking, oh, okay.
Can I just say, biggest, that was just one of the biggest letdowns ever. That I was excited for that one.
Yeah.
Russell Crowe, still the man. But that movie was.
Yeah, I passed on that one, I got to say.
There was a snake featured multiple times in that movie. So.
Well, we'll get talking about snakes here in a bit, so hang tight, big guy.
I'll step out. I'll step out for that.
So the report's no good. They go look at the land. Report's like, all right, there's no way. We can't do this. Everybody is up in arms, which remember, this is like 2.5 million people. So this is spreading like wildfire through the camp. They're all like, oh, why in the world would you bring us out here to fall by the sword? Our wives and children will be taken as plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to go back to Egypt? I mean, my word, these folks were just losing it. Moses and Aaron are falling face down. Joshua and Caleb, they're not giving up. They're like, no. We can do this. We can do this. The land is good. God is, He's with us. Don't rebel against the Lord. And the people are just like, we're going to kill these guys. Like, let's stone them. And
I mean, that goes to show you when you lead, when you're leading with fear and you're leading with your own abilities in mind more so than what God's called you to do, that, it's infectious. It trickles down. And then the people that are following you, they're just, they're like, what the heck? We're never going to be able to do this. If you don't believe you can do it or that God will do it.
Yeah. So anyway, they're just all ready. They're ready to give up. God's ready to just kill them all.
Yeah.
Start over again. He's like, well, I've done it before. I'll do it again. And they intercede. They're like, no, don't do this, because the Egyptians will hear that, like, oh, their God was strong enough to get them out, but not strong enough to deliver them. And anyway, the Lord relents, but He's like, hey, I'm going to give them what they asked. They said that they didn't want to get in this promised land. It's better off if they just died here. Very well.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Very well. If that's what you want,
we'll let a generation pass.
Enjoy. And that's what ends up happening. Every single one of them has to die in the wilderness, which, I don't know. Part of me thinks like as like people are dropping like flies. So I read this. This was wild. So if there was about 2.5 million people, let's just assume half of those were 20 years and over. If you do the math, that 1.2 million of them would have had to die over this time period. That is 82 funerals per day. That's a whole lot of fun. Talk about dropping like flies. I imagine as the numbers got dwindling down, I'd be like, if I'm like the new generation, I'd be just excited about it. We lost, another one. They're gone because I'm ready to get to this promised land.
See, I feel
like
like I would be like, it's like Squid Game up in here. Like, everybody's just falling. I'd be like, oh no.
Squid Game into the fire.
No, I haven't seen it. I read about it.
Yeah, you read about it because you read all the subtitles.
It's dubbed. Anyway.
But yeah, just waiting for people to die off because there was some wild stuff. Like their clothes weren't. I mean, I love fashion, and like this stuff is not wearing out. Their shoes are lasting forever. You're just kind of like, hurry up and die. I want to get into this promised land. That sounds harsh, but I do want to say this before we leave this little moment. So these people that so the ones who were responsible for spreading the bad report, they were struck down and they died of a plague, like gone right there. Okay, so lesson learned. Don't do that. But then what is funny to me, and this is in. I think it's around verse 41. So these folks, there was a bunch of them that were like, yeah, we've sinned, but you know what? Let's go. And we trust God now. Like we believe God now. And so they're going to go try to take this land. And this is the saddest verse. Verse 42 says, do not go up because the Lord is not with you. Talk about some sobering words. You will be defeated by your enemies. For the Amalekites and the Canaanites will face you there because you have turned away from the Lord. He will not be with you, and you will fall by the sword. Nevertheless, verse 44, in their presumption they went up toward the high point in the hill country, though neither Moses nor the ark of the Lord's covenant moved from the camp. Then the Amalekites and the Canaanites who live in that country came down, attacked them, and beat their tails all the way back
beat them down
to Hormah. But they're like, talk about the difference in the presence of God going before you and doing the very thing that God has called you to do, but in your own strength.
Yeah.
What a word of warning to us.
Yeah. And I can't even imagine like the feeling of utter defeat. I mean, I would have already felt defeated. Man, we came this far. We've seen all this, and now we can't go right into the promised land. But to like, oh, no, we believe now, and then go like get beat down and chase back, and you've still got to go on into the wilderness for 40 years. Come on.
It's frustrating.
That would have been horrible. But, we see, but it's the beginning of, or actually in the middle of the same pattern that we were talking about. Mm-hmm. Moses interceded. There's a way out. There's despair. Now they're walking it out. We see, more laws that God gives. But we also see more rebellion, starting in chapter 16 and moving on. But it's just more of the same. And if you guys want to jump in somewhere, feel free. But there were a few things that I kind of wanted to pick up before we got. I mean, one of the biggest points of this story, and Pastor, you mentioned it yesterday, but I thought it was a super cool point. I don't know if you guys want to hit it now or later, just because it shows up here and in Deuteronomy. But chapter 12 or chapter 20. But before that, there was something I just wanted to hit. There were a couple of spots, and this was just kind of like fun stuff. This is kind of the first one that I wanted to mention. But there were messianic prophecies that we see even in the Old Testament, and one kind of comes in chapter 19, where it says, "The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, here's another legal requirement commanded by the Lord. Tell the people of Israel to bring you a red heifer, a perfect animal that has no defects and has never been yoked to the plow. Give it to Eleazar the priest, and it will be taken outside the camp and slaughtered in the presence. Eleazar will take some of its blood in his finger and sprinkle it 7 times toward the front of the tabernacle. As Eleazar watches, the heifer must be burned." And then we see all of that. This is something that we see kind of mentioned again in the book of Matthew 5:17. And this is just something, and in effect, for Jews that are still practicing today, they are still waiting for the tabernacle to be rebuilt, right? So they can sacrifice the red heifer and hopefully signify the coming of Messiah. But we see it kind of mentioned in Matthew again, was just kind of a depiction of Jesus as the ultimate sacrifice. And I was just going to get.
You need me to find Matthew for you?
I was going to say my Bible drill.
Nothing like trying to find a verse.
I'm not great at
You were
where all of
referencing
them are,
Matthew
but
and
it's in the
Jude
beginning.
there. I was like, I can help out if you need.
Well, like
Help him.
like knowing where the books are
I'm a
and
Parks
having
and Rec
fat
degree, but I
thumbs
think I know where it is.
don't work
Page
well together.
1202.
But 5:17 says, "Don't misunderstand why I have come. I did not come to abolish the law of Moses or the writings of the prophets. No, I came to accomplish their purpose. I tell you the truth, until heaven and earth disappear, not even the smallest detail of God's law will disappear until its purpose is achieved. So if you ignore the least commandment and teach others to do the same, you will be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. But anyone who obeys God's laws and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. But I warn you, unless your righteousness is better than the righteousness of the teachers of the law and the Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. And this is Jesus just kind of taking some of that back and forth to like him fulfilling, him being the ultimate sacrifice. And this is something that we see kind of pop up just even a little later when he says not to forget these. But it says, like, the story in chapter 19, the sacrifice of the red heifer without defect or blemish prefigures Christ, the Lamb of God without spot or blemish, who was sacrificed for our sins. And it's just one of those things that we see Jesus speaking back to the law in chapter 5, but understanding that he's going to be that particular sacrifice for all of our sins later on. So it's just cool to see that come to pass from thousands of years before to Jesus' time. So it's just another way that the Bible is just one long story telling one big story of God in our history.
Mm-hmm. It's good. It's good.
And I'll work on my Bible drill
Your Bible
skills.
drill.
I'm a drummer. I can usually do more than one thing at a time, but
that's good. Well, I know, Pastor Jason, you were going into chapter 20, I think, talking about the water from the rock. Pastor Jeff, you mentioned that yesterday and just kind of talked about that story. Just kind of shine a spotlight back on that, if you will.
Absolutely. Well, so, people are thirsty again. They're always thirsty, and they're quarreling again. They're doing that whole, if we'd only died, when our brothers died, I mean, you're thirsty, okay? You be patient.
Not you when you're hungry. Kind of
yeah, exactly. They're, so God says, take the staff, go before the people. You're going to speak, emphasis on speak to that rock before their eyes, and it will pour out its water. You will bring water out of the rock for the community so that they and their livestock can drink. So the instructions are simple. Gather everybody, speak to the rock, water's going to flow out. Moses he's had enough. He's frustrated. He takes the staff. He says this, listen, you rebels. Must we bring you water out of this rock? It was not Moses and Aaron bringing water out of the rock. It is God providing for his people. So Moses is basically like, if I must, I must. And twice, I just think he winds up like with a baseball bat and just bang, bang, strikes this rock, and water pours out. Like, God still graciously provides for his people. But verse 12, God's like, nope, you just punched your card. Like, you're not going. And you didn't honor me as holy in the sight of Israel. You will not bring this community into the land that I give them. And like, wow, seems a little harsh. Could have given me a warning here. But God's like, no, that's, sorry, this is it. End of the line for you. You'll lead up to the promised land, but not in. And then by the end of that chapter, Aaron, he's still doing good, but God takes him out because he was an accomplice in it.
Yeah, it's always interesting. I know the first time I read through the Bible and I got to this part, I just remember kind of struggling with it like a little bit because it was harsh.
Right.
It was just like, okay.
So where's this merciful God?
A little bit, yeah. And it's like, all right, honestly, like one mistake, that's kind of the way that it feels. And it's not. He was, but I think over time, the way that I've read this is through the lens of leadership a little bit more that Moses was given. We've already talked about the heightened level of a leader that he was. Of all the ones, like, he trumped the priests. He was able to be something that no one else was able to be, and had access to God in a way that no one else had access to God. And I guess for me, I look at it, for those of us around the table, we're in full-time ministry, but really for everybody who's listening to this, they are too. They may not get a paycheck from the same place that we do. They may not be paid through a church. But for every one of us, we're in leadership. And I think for those of us who lead in the way of Jesus, the standard is just higher. Later on in the New Testament, the Bible talks about don't lead or live in a way that causes people to stumble. And when I think about it, my heart breaks for Moses. But at the same time, it's kind of sobering. It's
right.
What we are doing in leading people and pointing people to Jesus. It really is heaven and hell issues. The way that we love people, the way that we communicate and convey Christ, the way that we live and the way that we lead, it really matters. And so I think the weight of it is meant to be weighty. And so when I read it, and sometimes we read through the scripture and we think, well, this should be resolved and it should be a happy ending. And the truth of it is that life doesn't always work that way,
right.
and leadership doesn't always work that way. And so when I read this, it's a good reminder for me that like, hey, this is more than just like fun and games.
Yeah.
This matters.
You know, I like to think integrity matters, character matters, obedience matters, and small compromises have massive ramifications. I remember hearing this a long time ago of like the story of the Titanic. You know, you always heard like what sank the Titanic. It's like an iceberg did. And they said, no, studies were done that it was actually faulty rivets. That when they were manufacturing the metal, the steel for the rivets, something was wrong in the manufacturing process, and they went forward anyway, and that it should have been able to survive an impact like that, but it was those tiny little faulty rivets. And I think how often in leadership can we could go around and just talk about leaders where there were faulty rivets, and those faulty rivets took them out. And, this was just, I don't know, obviously he was tired.
Yeah.
He was hungry, angry, lonely, and tired. He needed to halt, as they say in AA. And out of anger, he lashed out. Unfortunately, there was a consequence, and it was great. But it is, you said, as a sobering reminder, and it's true.
It is.
It's true.
Well, and like the gracious and merciful part of the Lord, like he is not like he struck him down right there. It wasn't like an act of disobedience immediately caused him to die and perish right there. Like he still got to, even though he didn't get to enter in, like he still got to kind of see his people there.
That's a good point.
Which tells me that he really, again, I've made a point that he cared for his people.
Yeah.
Because at that point, if I'm not going, ain't nobody going.
No doubt.
And no, he still led. He led.
Right.
So.
Yeah.
All right, so just to keep rolling here, we roll right into chapter 22. And Pastor, this was something you didn't have time to mention in the message. It's one of my favorite stories in Numbers, just because it spans several chapters. And oddly enough, it's one of those things that this story kind of happens in the middle of a bigger story, because we see that it's a guy named Balak who sends for a guy named Balaam. And this is happening almost like, if you're reading a comic book and you're in the middle of a big story, see Spider-Man does blah, blah, blah. But meanwhile, there's another story happening across town that Spider-Man has no idea. This is where we see this. The Israelites have no idea this is going on. Or, some way Moses got the story to write it down. So some way he found out in the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, maybe. But we see that Balak is a ruler of a kingdom. And so just to kind of give it a little more contrast, it says, the people of Israel traveled to the plains of Moab, and this is chapter 22, and camped east of the Jordan River across from Jericho. Balak, son of Zippor, the Moabite king, had seen everything the Israelites did to the Amorites. And when the people of Moab saw how many Israelites there were, they were terrified. The king of Moab said to the elders of Midian, this mob will devour everything in sight like an ox devours grass in the field. So Balak, king of Moab, sent messengers to call Balaam, son of Beor, who is living in his native land of Pethor, near the Euphrates River. And this is what he said. He said, look, a vast horde of people has arrived from Egypt. They cover the face of the earth and are threatening me. Please come and curse these people for me, because they are too powerful for me. And so that's kind of the gist of where we see this thing start to unfold. So Balak sends his messengers to Balaam, and it does say that Balaam is he's somebody that God speaks to, and he recognized the one true God. So this actually goes to answer a question we had a couple of weeks ago here of, were there other people that believed in God, or, how did that work? Well, there were foreigners that lived among the Israelites, and there were people outside of the Israelite camp that believed in the one true God, and Balaam was one of those guys. Well, what we see unfold is the fact that the one true God does show up, and he speaks to Balaam in a dream, tells him what's going to happen, and say, you can't curse these people because I have blessed them. Basically, you can't curse what I've blessed. And Balaam, bless his heart, tries over and over to convey the message to Balak's messengers, and then to Balak himself, that no matter how much you give me, I can't help you.
Even if Balak gave me all the silver and gold in his palace, I couldn't do anything great or small to go beyond the command of the Lord.
And so I love how this unfolds.
Basically.
But the imagery even starts to shape up a little more when we see that, because Balaam wasn't even going to go to Balak and give him the answer face to face. But God releases him, says, you can go, but you're going to tell him the same thing. But then the funny thing happened, like one of the coolest parts of this story is what we see that happens to Balaam as he's traveling.
His donkey.
To Balak.
The donkey, which insert
Poor
Eddie
donkey.
Murphy's voice right now in my head. A little Shrek is going on here.
You've seen a horse fly. Yeah. You've seen a super fly, but you ain't never seen a donkey fly.
And I feel like the donkey is kind of he's the victim in this whole story anyway.
I remember hearing old King James preachers teaching this story. I like it that way.
Why?
Why is that, Pastor?
The real
Yeah.
name for donkey.
Yes.
Yeah.
I just want you to say it.
Oh,
Just trying to get you to say it.
we are all middle schoolers at heart.
Yeah, you're right. The poor donkey. He's
Yeah.
the one that really takes the abuse.
Well, the funny thing is the donkey's the one that can like actually see what's going on.
Right.
And but he, how does a donkey relay to Balaam that there's the road is blocked up ahead and there's an angel of the Lord that's that's blocking the way.
Verse 25. So he beat the donkey again. The poor donkey. I mean,
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
come on, man.
Was it 3 different times? He's like trying to get this donkey, and the donkey's like, "We ain't going that way. We ain't go. I can't do it. I can't do it." And the donkey kept seeing the angel of the Lord, and eventually, 27, when the donkey saw the angel of the Lord, it lay down under Balaam. So now Balaam's mad. He's embarrassed, and this is when the Lord opened the donkey's mouth. And so the donkey
I love what he
talking.
says. I love what he
Yeah.
says.
What have I done?
What have I done
Make me do this 3 times.
to you?
What have I done? What have I done to you? Make me 3 times. That's my best Eddie Murphy. That's what I got. And then Balaam's answering the donkey, which he doesn't. It's like it doesn't even register
He
yet.
didn't even say he wasn't like, "Why are you talking?"
Yeah,
He didn't say that.
"You made a fool of me. If only I had a sword in my hand, I would kill you right now."
I would kill this
I'd be like,
talking
man,
donkey.
I'm going to make a lot of money. My donkey's talking. Somebody's going to want to see this. And
Right?
he's like, no, I'd kill you. I'm like, what?
Yeah. Then the donkey says, "Am I not your own donkey, which you have always ridden to this day? Have I been in the habit of doing this to you?" And he's like, "No, you got a point." Verse 31, then the Lord opened Balaam's eyes, and he saw what his donkey saw. And now he was like, "Oh, snap."
This donkey's like, it's a boulder. That's a nice boulder.
Nice boulder.
Nice boulder.
Oh, I watched Shrek just a little while ago. 1, 2, and 3.
Why?
Why not? It's a great movie. Yeah. So anyway, the donkey could see what he couldn't see, and the donkey was protecting him. So.
Yeah, and this is a great story just for anybody to go in and kind of read the whole thing. The reason I love this story so much because I feel like it puts in perspective and kind of creates the context of what the Israelites would have been blessed to understand what was happening. At the same time that they were struggling and having doubts about going into the land that God was going to give them, all these other nations were having doubts about even allowing these guys to stay in because they saw the fact that they could prosper, that they could overtake them if they were left to. And so Balak wanted Balaam to come in and curse them. Well, what we see that happens later, through the rest of the story is that Balaam actually ends up blessing them because he couldn't do anything else. God had already blessed them and put his stamp of approval on them. But it just kind of makes me wonder if they had seen that they were already, like their presence being intimidating to other nations, like would it have made a difference on their confidence of being able to go into the promised land?
Well, one thing that I like in chapter 23, so Balak has hired Balaam basically to go and curse them, and he's like, I can't. I can only say what the Lord tells me to say. So Balaam speaks a message, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, but in verse 9, he says, "From the rocky peaks I see them, from the heights I view them. I see a people who live apart and do not consider themselves one of the nations," which is exactly what God has been trying to do. I want you to be set apart. I want you to be different. Don't take on the customs of everybody else. And this is what's being said. And then, of course, he's blessing them, and Balak says to Balaam, "What have you done? I brought you to curse my enemies, but you've done nothing but bless them." And he answers, he's like, "Must I not speak what the Lord puts in my mouth?"
Yeah, it's interesting too, Pastor Jeff, what you read, verse 9, really verse 10 too, where it says, "Who can count the dust of Jacob or number even the fourth of Israel?" And when basically what he's saying is how vast the nation is. And Pastor Jason, to your point, if you rewind to when they said, "We're like grasshoppers in our own eyes," like they couldn't see themselves for everything that God had really created them and equipped them to be. Everyone else did, but they saw themselves a different way.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting and sad. Like if you think about it, it's sad too.
Yeah.
If you want to dig deeper, there's in the whole Balaam donkey thing. We did a series called "Hello, My Name Is," and we were talking about how you don't have to make headlines to make an impact. And so there's a whole message on "My Name Is Balaam." We'll drop it in the description or show notes.
That was a fun one. That was
for you
one.
there. Some takeaways. It was a great message. I loved it. I preached it, so it's kind of weird that I said that, but I did. I loved it because I talked about a talking donkey. So It was good.
Oh, and there is one more cool thing that Balaam said. It was in his final address. It's in chapter 24. And it's the message Balaam delivered. He said, "This is the message, Balaam, son of Beor." He goes on to say, "The message of one who hears the words of God." So just to prove that he was a man that heard from God, who has knowledge of the Most High, who sees a vision from the Almighty, who bows down with eyes wide open. I see him, but not here and now. I perceive him, but not far in the distant future. A star will rise from Jacob. A scepter will emerge from Israel.
Who could that be?
It will crush the heads of Moab's people, cracking their skulls. And who we find out that this is actually a prophecy of Jesus, who is, Revelation refers to Jesus as the morning star because of his glory, his brightness, his splendor. It's also, he's called a scepter because of his royalty and stuff like that. So this is just a picture of who's actually going to ultimately deliver Israel. Super cool stuff. All in just a handful of chapters.
By the time we get to chapter 26, we've got a second census. The whole idea of numbers. Let's number the people again because we've gotten a whole new generation now, and they've almost replenished. They're at 601,730 plus women, children, Levites. So they're only off by a couple thousand people. And so, they're, again, still strong in number. And the chapter begins to round out. Take us through the rest of it.
Well, and just seeing the divisions of everything that they had, we see more offerings, daily offerings of the festival. Pastor, one thing you mentioned was in 33, and it's the remembering Israel's journey. This was important for them stepping into who they were, because this is a generation that didn't get to see a lot of what happened before their time in the wilderness. So chapter 33 is just kind of a step-by-step of where they actually did come from during their time after coming out of Egypt.
Yeah, literally everywhere they stopped and camped, you're given a picture of where it's at, so you could go plot it on a map, real places. Just kind of neat to watch their entire journey unfold.
Yeah, and so many good things. And we see Numbers coming to an end, and I know we want to jump into Deuteronomy and hit it pretty quick.
Let's talk one thing before we wrap up Numbers is cities of refuge. Let's just for a moment, just so that makes sense to people that if you've never heard of this before, it's in Numbers chapter 35, begins in verse 6. It says, 6 of the towns you give to the Levites will be cities of refuge, to which a person who has killed someone may flee. In addition, give them 42 other towns. It's talking about that's for the Levites. And but the idea is, let's say you're out working in a field and something happens. There's an accident. You accidentally kill somebody. Well, guess what? That family's coming after you. And if you can hightail it to a city of refuge, you can find a safe place until you can get a proper hearing. And I just thought it was interesting that God's providing a way for, if something was done accidentally, for somebody to be able to take off. I imagine you better be fast, though.
You gotta be faster than the Avenger of Blood.
That's true. The guy's called the family can hire an Avenger of Blood.
It's like, here's my business card. What do you do? Well,
Avenger of Blood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It makes me want to stay in shape for no other reason than to be able to get to a city of refuge.
Well, and I
thought you meant to be an Avenger of Blood.
Avenger of Blood. Cool. What are you doing? Training to be an Avenger of Blood.
And I love the point of clarity in verse 30. It says, all murderers must be put to death, but only if evidence is presented by more than one witness. No one may be put to death on the testimony of only one witness. I mean, it's just cool how you see everything kind of unfold that way, and just open up, and the clarity was awesome, and just constantly making a way. I love that. Mm-hmm. And so, binge Numbers.
Numbers was just binged.
Yeah, check.
Who knew there's so much good stuff in Numbers?
It is funny, like the conversations I've had before the podcast today, just with people kind of around the building and even at church yesterday. Most people said that, they always start out reading plans with the best of intentions, but when they get to Numbers, they just most of the time don't make it through. And now having read through, I'm like,
it's actually some good stuff.
This is really fun book.
It's very good.
All right, Deuteronomy. We because this was double feature. Mm-hmm. We rolled through Deuteronomy, and admittedly, I went very fast through Deuteronomy in the sermon because it's considered second law. It's a book of remembrance. It's Moses' 3 farewell speeches to the new generation. So he's basically like, hey, let me just remind you of everything that has transpired to this point, from slavery in Egypt to crossing the Red Sea to Mount Sinai. Let me remind you of everything your parents did, how they wilded out, went off the rails. God punished them. You're the new generation. And so he's reminding them of everything that happened. Then he's also like rehashing the law. And so he wants them to understand the 10 commandments. And so you see him retelling the story. It was chapter 5 where he gets to the 10 commandments. So he's helping them understand, like, again, these commandments are not restrictions. The law equals life. So he's helping them understand how to live in a way that honors the Lord, experiences his blessing. And then chapter 6, he goes into, I talked just for a moment, but I was kind of going so fast. I talked about what's called the Shema, which is a daily prayer. And he's instructing these people. Here's like, let's not let this ever leave our hearts and our minds, and let's take it really serious. And so let's teach it to our children so that every generation knows and learns. And we're given this in Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4. This prayer is such a powerful prayer. It's prayed multiple times a day. It goes like this: Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. These commands that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home, when you walk along the road, when you lie down, when you get up. And we see this, like, if you're familiar with the New Testament, Jesus is asked, what's the most important commandment? And he reaches back to this daily prayer, this Shema. There's, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. But then what's interesting, I remember going on my very first trip to Israel. I wasn't very familiar with Israel culture. And I'm watching people on the plane who are practicing Jews, and they start taking out these, like, it looks like leather strips, and they start wrapping them around their arms. And then they take this thing, it's got like a box, and they tie it on their forehead. And I'm like, what is going on? And they're praying. And what they're doing is they're still practicing what is written here in Deuteronomy. Verse 8 says to tie them as symbols on your hands, bind them on your foreheads, write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates. When you walk in, like if you're staying in a hotel, going into every room is a little box on the door, and in it is a small scroll. And it's their way of literally living this out. And I thought, what a great way of keeping it in front. Like, man, we're going to talk about this with our kids when we're putting them to bed, when we're sitting around the table, when we're walking along the way. We're going to bind them on our arms, tie them on our head, put them on the doorpost, and they literally still do it to this day. Awesome. Powerful reminder.
That's super powerful.
To me, I love the book of Deuteronomy just overall. I think to me, it's kind of an overview. I mean, it's obviously, Pastor Jeff, you mentioned that Moses is giving the history to the new generation. I think for somebody who's diving in and trying to kind of understand an overview of even the nation of Israel and their history, this book is a great one to give you that. But it also almost drills down into what you just talked about, and it shows you another level of intimacy that all of that history brings to it, in that those prayers and in what you just walked through. But the other side of it that I love is I think it speaks to unity. I mean, this nation's getting ready to go into the promised land, and multiple times you hear things about there's one place of worship. The Lord our God is one. Like it brings this idea that there's unity, that we're together and that we're together with him.
Yeah.
And together we can take the promised land. So I love, just to me, Deuteronomy is a rich book. I guess it's the best word that I can think to describe it.
Yeah. Well, I love the thing because the thing that I see carry through, I mean, just like the other books in the Pentateuch, you see that same pattern of rebelliousness and God punishing and all that. I feel like he gets a little more personal with it, and Moses, in his direction, makes it a little more personal, tries to make it super clear. The reoccurring theme, it seems like in Deuteronomy, is if you obey God, you will be blessed. If you disobey God, you will be cursed. And that sounds really harsh and black and white. But if you look in chapter 7, and a lot of this is his call to holiness. But chapter 7, verse 7 says, "The Lord did not set his heart on you and choose you because you were more numerous than other nations, for you were the smallest of all nations. But rather, it's simply that the Lord loves you, and he was keeping the oath he had sworn to your ancestors." So many people, they look at the Old Testament God as a God that was harsh and angry and all this, but he chose them because he loved them. And it goes on to say, even down a little further, In verse 9, it says, understand, therefore, that the Lord your God is indeed God. He is the faithful God who keeps his covenant for 1,000 generations and lavishes his unfailing love on those who love and obey his commands. But he does not hesitate to punish and destroy those who reject him. Therefore, you must obey all these commands, decrees, and regulations I am giving you today. And it just goes on even a little further to talk about how much more love God has for them. But it's ultimately, we see even later on, and I can't remember which chapter it is, maybe in chapter 27, where we see, Moses gets really literal when he says, when you go in, some will gather on Mount Gerizim, Mount Ebal, and you'll read the blessing and you'll read the curse, and it's just to get it in their head that for life you will receive the blessings of God, and this is obedience. Or there's death, and this is the consequences of disobedience. Mm-hmm. And I just think it's crazy the length that they went to make that visual so people could really understand, hey, this is life or death, blessings and curse, this is the reality. But God loves you, so he is going to make a way, and he will be faithful to his word.
Well, I went into 28 in my sermon on Sunday, but I just always, in my mind, I picture two doors, and one is the door of obedience, and one is the door of disobedience. And every day we make choices of which door do I want to walk through. Will I trust God? And if I walk through the door of blessing, I don't know what's on the other side of it, but he promises goodness. If I walk through the door of disobedience, man, it's a laundry list of things that'll go wrong. And we live in a world where God says, I love you enough to let you make your own decision. And it's unfortunate how frequently people will choose to go against God, choose disobedience, and then get bent out of shape when things don't work out. They'll cry foul in a moment because of the consequences that they reap from the decisions they made. And I tell people, you never know what's on the other side of obedience. You have no idea where your yes will take you. And so, man, obedience, blessed. Disobedience, there's a laundry list of consequences.
Well, and I think it's important to note that disobedience isn't necessarily just doing something like the wrong thing. It could be not doing it when the Lord tells you to do it, or
True.
partial obedience is still disobedience. There's a lot of things that it's not just the right thing or the wrong thing. It's the right thing at the wrong time. Like they did the right thing, but without the Lord's blessing earlier, and that was still the wrong thing. That's still disobedient.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I've heard somebody say delayed obedience is still disobedience. That sounds familiar.
Yeah.
Pastor Jeff, I think.
Yeah.
Said that a time or two.
What's
great is if you keep reading, you get to chapter 30, and it basically says, when all these blessings and curses I've set before you come on you, and you take them to heart, wherever the Lord your God disperses you among the nations, he goes on and he says, I'm gonna gather you back. Mm-hmm. And he says, I will have compassion on you. I'll gather you again from all the nations where he scattered you. He's not given up, which is just a great promise of the Lord. Like, he is the covenant keeper. Yep. It goes all the way back to that covenant that he made. He's still keeping it. He is faithful even when we're faithless.
Well, it's got to be kind of a bummer for Moses, because if you back up to chapter 29, because he does he reviews the covenant, but he also kind of predicts that they are going to be disloyal and they'll be exiled. And then in verse 30, he says, but God will restore and give you new hearts that truly love and obey God. And I feel like it like the closeout of the book does, it's got some pretty dramatic stuff, but it closes out like pretty quickly. Like it just kind of rolls from there. And
he sets up his successor in 31.
Mm-hmm.
This is where we meet Joshua, which is where we're going to be this coming weekend at Lifepoint. So he names his successor. We'll learn a lot more about him. He breaks out in song. Got a little song there in 32.
Got to leave a legacy.
Kevin, did you want to sing that?
I would, but I didn't warm up before coming in. So,
got to do this vocal.
But I could.
warm-ups.
I really don't want to make anybody feel bad with my
talent,
my heightened level of talent.
Yeah, he even got a thing in there about the venom of vipers that glide in the dust. So
yeah, that'll come in my cringe moment, briefly.
So song, and then Moses dies on Mount Nebo. And I'll never forget Mount Nebo. I remember hearing somebody say one time, Mount Nebo is where Moses could see but not go. Mm-hmm. And I don't know why that has always stood out in my head. I think I even said it on Sunday. He could see but not go. He dies there, but the Lord buries him. Yeah. What's up with that? Why is that? I know you have speculations. Why is it? You think the people would have worshipped the bones?
I did. I mean, well, so that was one of the things. I feel like there were several things, as we see Deuteronomy close, there were several things that were left unresolved. And I believe that would have been another one on the list had they been permitted to take his bones, because one of the things left unresolved was, with the access that Moses had and the things that he got to see and experience with God, would there ever be another Moses? And in their hearts and minds, I don't believe they would have taken anything. I believe that they would have taken the bones with them, and they would have set them up as a shrine. I mean, not to throw stones against anyone even living now, I do believe that we've taken several of these characters, and not us, but in other sects of other religions, and they worship these characters instead of the one true God. So I feel like we kind of do that anyway. But I do believe that I like to believe, this is not a scholarly view or anything. I like to believe, because of the relationship that Moses had with the Lord, is why he was permitted to go off into God's presence, and God buried him. Yeah. There are a few people that you see in the Word that had a closer relationship with God, Elijah, Enoch. I like to think that was kind of it. Like that was kind of Moses' reward, because he couldn't go to the promised land. And we even mentioned earlier, just when we're filming, like because it does state, like it mentions Moses' physicality was still intact. Yeah. He was still really strong. He was still mentally acute. So he was still ready to charge and whatever.
I think it's verse 7 says his eyes were not weak, nor his strength gone.
Yeah.
So again, it kind of speaks to
120
years old. Yeah. It also just speaks to, again, the heartbreak of him not being able to lead the people that he loved into the promised land, that he could have. Yeah. He could have done that. But then right below that, it talks about Joshua, and how, I think it's in Numbers when Joshua comes up the first time, and it says that the Lord told Moses, give Joshua a portion of your influence, but not all of it. And then we see it in verse 9 that it says Joshua, son of Nun, was filled with the spirit of wisdom, because Moses had laid his hands on him. So the Israelites listened to him and did what the Lord had commanded Moses. And so it's just like God fully prepares Joshua for what's next and gives him that wisdom.
Well, I like as it wraps up. So Moses is told, you're going to die on Mount Nebo. You'll be able to see but not go. He blesses the tribes, because this is what a loving, good leader does. He speaks blessings over them, and then he goes up Mount Nebo. He dies. The Lord buries him, and the book comes to a close.
Yep. We have binged Deuteronomy.
Yeah, we did that a whole lot faster. But again, it's
a bit of a recap.
I think one of the reasons that sometimes you'll struggle through a book like Deuteronomy is you're like, I read this already. I read this already. But you have to remember, he's telling a new generation, which is why it's such a part of their culture. Teach it to the next generation. Teach it to the next generation. And that's exactly what he's doing.
Yeah.
It's good.
Numbers, Deuteronomy, binged.
Well, and I think the cliffhanger for leading into the next few is some of the stuff that was unresolved that they're facing right now. And I hear it remember the old school Batman, when Batman and Robin were captured, like, will they escape? Will they return? Will, the Penguin?
I do remember that.
Do you remember that?
I do, yeah.
I kind of hear that in my head, because it's like, they don't really know what to do. When will God restore them?
Yeah.
Just like I said, will there ever be another Moses?
Come to church on Sunday and find out. Same bat time, same bat channel.
Batman.
Awesome.
You could be my Robin.
That's probably one of the nicest things anybody's ever said to me.
All right. Well, I think this is a good time to transition into one of our segments called Inquiring Minds. We have some questions that have been submitted. So if y'all out there have any questions, everybody, you can always drop them in the comments.
Send in good questions.
Yeah, email them. We are always excited about questions. We may not get all of them, but we'll hit the ones that we can. All right. So the first one, was Aaron still the high priest, or was Moses, now that he could enter the tabernacle?
Aaron still was.
Yeah, Aaron's the high priest. Yeah. I think Moses he can kind of go where he wants.
Yeah. I think we talked about that for a minute earlier, how he was able to he had access. He was the one who was able to have access to God outside of that.
Well, and the priests had some pretty specific ways for they had to prepare to enter in, and they still weren't permitted in to see God the way Moses did.
Mm-hmm. It's a good question.
Yeah. Another one from Numbers 20 was, why did the Edomites not allow the Israelites to cross through their land?
They were jerks.
Obviously.
Edomites.
Like none shall pass.
Well, you were saying, what was it, two and a half?
It's the second Monty Python reference.
I don't.
Monty Python, or is that
Yeah, that's the
Rings?
Holy Grail. None shall pass.
what's the Lord of the Rings? You shall not
You
pass.
shall not pass.
That's
Oh,
different.
yeah.
Oh yeah.
You got to slam your staff there too.
Okay.
Gandalf moment.
Gandalf.
None shall pass. I just want to keep saying it.
Just keep going into like all the different.
It makes me want to follow
versions.
you with some
Edomite.
coconuts.
Well,
Real
back
answer,
to the
though,
question though.
is I would assume that because of the Israelites are referred to as a horde.
Yeah.
I mean, over 2
she a hefty
million
horde.
people.
Yeah.
And even though they're like, we'll stay on the road, we won't drink any of the water, just let us pass through. They're like, nah. We
Yeah.
can't
I mean,
handle that.
what was it? 2.5 million people.
And people were afraid of them. There was
Yeah.
fear was developing. So
Yeah, the research that I did, it said that it was because they were worried about the toll it would take on their natural resources, which is fair. I mean, it's not just like 200 people.
Well, even throwing it back to Numbers 22, that was the concern of Balak and the other kingdoms, was that they would wreak havoc on our lands, and they would basically eat them out of house and home.
Yeah. All right, another one. Were they still being led by the cloud during their wandering for 40 years?
yes,
I feel like that was a
So
trick
Lord's
question.
still leading them.
Yeah. All right. Well, that was easy. quick answer.
Well, the cloud by day and fire by night.
Fire by night. Yeah. All right. Last one for this section. And actually, we may not even want to answer this one. This question is from Numbers 13, but it's why did Moses change Joshua's name? But Pastor, I don't know if you want to get into all that
well,
yet.
bonus points if anybody can tell me what Joshua's name was in Hebrew. Hoshea. Hoshea. Hoshea means salvation, and then Moses changes it. But I'm not going to tell you what he changes it to. You got to come to church to get that one.
Oh yeah.
So if you were thinking about skipping this week, I'd change your plans and come so that you can know what his name got changed to and why. So we'll talk about that on Sunday.
Joshua coming up. All right. Well, that's it for Inquiring Minds. I think it's time to segue to everyone's favorite section, Cringe the Bible.
the Bible.
Cringe time.
Gotta get
Yeah.
cringy.
We need a theme song for Cringe the Bible.
Cringe time.
Cringe time.
Oh,
That's kind of like
Excellent.
a Wayne's
Yeah.
Wayne's
Cringe time.
theme.
Excellent.
I was thinking we could maybe outsource that, but that's cool that we developed that internally. That's good too.
no,
Problem
I
solved.
do jingles. It's what I do.
Yeah. All right. So cringe moments, Pastor Kevin. I think you had one that
I do
you've
have
just
one
been really
that
thrilled
spoke to me.
about. Yeah.
It's in the book of Numbers chapter 21. So once again, the Israelites, the Bible says they complained. This time it says they complained against God and against Moses. And it's kind of the same pattern we've seen where like we don't have what we need. It was better back in Egypt, and they just complained. So this time, the way that they're dealt with is really interesting. So it says in verse 6 of chapter 21 that the Lord sent venomous snakes among them. So this is the worst nightmare scenario for me personally. Okay, I think we've covered this on the podcast before. We were talking about it earlier, and it was said it's like the Indiana Jones Temple of Doom
Snakes.
flow.
Why has it got to be snakes?
Why has it got to be snakes? This is awful. So listen to this scene. The Lord sends venomous snakes. They bit the people, and many Israelites died. Okay, that's bad. Then the people come to Moses, and like you would if you're grumbling and venomous snakes come and say, hey, we're sorry. This is essentially what they say. We sinned when we spoke against the Lord. We sinned when we spoke against you. Pray that the snakes would go away. So Moses prayed for the people. And then here's what the Lord tells Moses to do. Make a snake and put it on a pole so that anyone who is bitten can look up at it and live. So here's the nightmare scenario for me. So Moses does this. It works. But then the very last verse of this little portion says, then when anyone was bitten by a snake and looked at the bronze snake, they lived. So you have these people who are just staring at this statue being bitten by snakes that they're not looking at, I guess. It doesn't make it any better to me.
Yeah,
So
you're still getting bit by snakes.
venomous, non-venomous,
I'm just not about getting bit.
I'm out. It's at that point that I'm probably like, Edomites don't sound too bad.
You gotta know that every like parents took advantage of this. Every time their kids were complaining, they're like, "Yo, keep it up, and the Lord will get you with a snake." You want snakes? I think I see a snake over there. Like my complaining would have come to a complete halt.
Yeah, no, that's it's not a good day.
Yeah, I just picture Pastor Kevin there and being like, "Hey, what happened to Pastor Kevin? He got bit by a snake? No snake bites on him.
No,
He just
passed
killed
away.
over."
He just passed away. He set himself on fire.
Literally deceased.
Who just set themselves on fire? That's Kevin.
Oh, there are a couple, two little cool points with that story. The one is that the image of that bronze snake, that was kind of the forerunner to what we kind of see on ambulances and stuff, you know, the healing or whatever.
insignia.
Yeah, it's also like it also kind of prefigures like the lifting up of Jesus on the cross.
Well,
So
you
another
have,
little-
jump to John chapter 3. Nicodemus comes to Jesus, and they have this whole conversation, and he says, just as Moses lifted up a snake in the wilderness, so the Son of Man, speaking of himself, must be lifted up, that everyone who believes may have eternal life in him. So you look at the snake, you live,
Right.
you fix your eyes on Jesus, believe in him, you have eternal life.
Eternal life.
So a little foreshadowing of things to
Yeah.
come.
So every time you see an
Like the
ambulance,
Nicodemus version better than this one. This is just
Nobody's
not my
getting
jam.
bit.
It's not my jam.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
but
My
that is
cringe
pretty-
moment. That's my
pretty
cringe moment.
cringy.
terrifying.
Yeah.
Terrifying.
I think
So I
that's
had a
another
moment,
one.
yeah. So coming on the heels of the Balaam story. Remember he and his talking donkey. So he can't curse the Israelites, but what he can do is he gives them he gives a little bit of insight to the Moabites. He's like, hey, listen, if you could get your Moabite women to seduce the Israelite men, if they start sleeping with these Moabite women, they will, in fact, bring a curse upon themselves. So I can't curse them, but I can give you a little bit of insight how to. And so these Moabite women be coming out, showing off their stuff, strutting around, and these men, they're chasing down these call girls. And in chapter 25, verse 6, we see that an Israelite man brought into the camp a Midianite woman right before the eyes of Moses. This guy doesn't even care. He's got his woman. Moses is like, oh, is he really doing that? Yeah, right in front of him. And so before Moses and the whole assembly of Israel, while they were weeping at the entrance to the tent of meeting. So these guys are heartbroken before the Lord. When Phinehas, son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, the priest, saw this, he's like, I got to do something about this. He left the assembly, took a spear in his hand, and he followed the Israelite into the tent. He drove the spear into both of them, right through the Israelite man and into the woman's stomach.
Phineas.
Phineas and
Phineas.
Ferb got
Ferb.
violent.
Ferb is later. He's in chapter 26. Ferb shows up.
Phineas, I mean, he's like, he saw this going down, and he's like, I'm going to put a stop to this. And he just killed them with a spear, like a 2-for-1 deal right there. And we're told that the plague stopped. 24,000 people died. So that's my cringe moment.
It's cringy.
Like, that just happened.
it's cringe, but
Very
that's awesome.
cheerful.
And I do
Phineas
love,
came out. He's like, everyone, you're welcome. Somebody come clean this up.
I do love, by the way, because you see Balaam is kind of the instigator. Like when you
Yeah.
see their retribution in chapter 31, he was one of the ones that was killed in that retribution.
This man is just like sneaky. He's like, I think we're alone now. Phineas is creeping up with his spear.
Phineas.
Doesn't seem to be anyone around. Anybody know this one? Belinda Carlisle?
Oh, yeah. I know it.
I know
oh,
the
yeah.
Tiffany
I'm
version.
trying not to
is
sing.
that the same?
Trying not to take it an octave up.
That's my moment. That's what I got.
Yeah.
man.
Well, if anything, that was a cheerful, cringy moment for sure. Well,
Better than snakes.
better than the
Better than
snakes.
the bronze
It
snake.
always is better than the snakes. Well, guys, thank you for joining us. We have binged pretty quickly, I think, successfully, maybe, Numbers and Deuteronomy. Don't forget, comment, like, share, subscribe, all that. We'll see you next time for Joshua.